Hi, I am back, I'm Silverpaw Reads, and let's do Chapter 10 of Detention. When Roxas woke up, he was incredibly warm. It was a pleasant sensation, almost as if he were sitting in front of a giant bonfire. He snuggled into the source of the heat, burying his face against the chest in front of him, ready to fall back asleep. This, however, was not to be, as in the next moment the door burst open and Sora rushed in, screaming his head off. Roxas! Roxas, it's snowing! Roxas, it's the first snow of the year! The brunette jumped on top of the pair, shaking Roxas excitedly, making the blonde groan and Axel moan tiredly. I hate the fucking snow. Sora, go away, Roxas mumbled. Snow is cold, and I'm really warm. Sora paused, frowning. You're right, it is really warm in here. That's weird, because I mean, it's not like we have a heater or anything. He trailed off for a moment, in which Roxas tried to fall back asleep. Well, anyway, it's time to get up for school or you'll both be late. Leon said I had to do it by any means necessary. I thought you ought to know that I have a bucket full of snow right outside the bedroom door. Axel sat up quickly, yanking Roxas with him, and he forgot to release the blonde in his movements. Don't you even dare, he snarled, rubbing a hand over his face and wiping the sleep from his eyes. He yawned a moment later, which really destroyed his angry image. Roxas sighed, loosening Axel's arms from around him before excusing Sora with a wave of his hand. We're up, Sora. Put the snow back outside, he instructed. Okay, Sora agreed brightly, prancing out of the room, far too awake for Roxas's liking. Sorry about him, Roxas muttered. He's kind of a morning person. Axel merely muttered obscenities under his breath while running his hand over his face again. You can use the shower first, Roxas offered, stifling a yawn and stretching his arms above his head. As Axel tiredly went to take a shower, Roxas looked through Leon's closet, also known as the hall closet, for something for the redhead to wear. Leon was shorter than Axel, who wasn't, but the brunette tended to wear his jeans long, so the bottoms dragged on the ground when he wore them. He hoped they would be long enough for Axel. He hardly spared a glance at the shirts, figuring it would be better for Axel to wear one of his own than having Leon on his case about stealing his clothes. Axel apparently took very quick showers, for he came back to Roxas' room about 3 minutes after Roxas himself. It seemed he literally only took as long as it was necessary to get clean before getting out again. When Roxas questioned this, the redhead simply replied, I don't like water, it makes me steam, which is weird as hell. Roxas raised both eyebrows at this, curiosity overtaking him. You mean, you literally steam? Axel nodded as if this were normal, accepting the offered jeans from Roxas. He promptly put them on, leaving Roxas to once more gawk stupidly. Was he seriously going commando? In Leon's jeans? Axel seemed to realize this at the same time before shrugging. Well, it's too late now. I'll replace these, they fit pretty well, and I must say, I look pretty damn sexy. Roxas groaned and shook his head, now completely distracted. Axel did look sexy with no shirt on, and his jeans hanging loose and low on his hips, his wet hair plastered to his neck, his chest covered in water droplets. Roxas suddenly had the insane desire to lick those little drops of water off the redhead's chest. His eyes trailed down Alex's chest, finally coming to rest on the tantalizing line of red hair that led below the waistband of the jeans. Axel laughed and snapped his fingers in front of Roxas's eyes. Roxas lifted his gaze, following Axel's hand as the redhead raised to his face, finally pointing at his eyes. My eyes are up here, the redhead said in an exaggerating, lisping voice, causing Roxas to chuckle with embarrassment, turning away in hopes that the redhead wouldn't see him blush. Of course he did, though, and this only prompted him to try and make the blonde blush even more. What, Roxy? Tell me you've never gone commando before. If you haven't, you really should give it a try. It's wonderfully free-feeling, he teased. Why would you do that to me, Ax? I'm not going to be able to look at you all day without thinking about it. Axel laughed out loud before Roxas knew what was happening. Axel's arms had come to wrap tightly around his waist, the redhead leaning his head down until his lips were right next to Roxas's ear, brushing against the lobe as he spoke. Then you'll be pleased to know that I never wear boxers. The only thing under my jeans is me, all the time. Roxas let out a tortured moan as he could just imagine Axel's grin. He was just about to turn around and show his boyfriend exactly what he thought of that when Sora came bounding into the room again. Rox, you have 15 minutes before we have to go, Sora announced warningly, seemingly aware that Roxas had done nothing at all to ready himself for school. Roxas cussed quietly, reluctantly pulled himself out of Axel's grasp, heading off toward the bathroom so he could take a shower. Now, if there's one thing to know about Roxas, it's the fact that he simply is incapable of taking a shower in less than 10 minutes. Call it magic, science, or lack of willpower on the blonde's part, but it really was just impossible for him. That explained why, 20 minutes later, when Roxas rushed out of the bedroom fully dressed with sopping wet hair, the only person he saw was Axel. The redhead was leaning against the wall, staring into space, green eyes vacant with thought. Roxas took a moment to take an appreciative look, noting that Axel had helped himself to Roxas's favorite t-shirt. It was black with 2 large keys crossed on the front, surrounded by flames. It wasn't something someone ran into often, but he'd found it at the Salvation Army for only $2, and he'd felt just compelled to buy it. The shirt was really soft and well worn, and it had quickly become his favorite. For whatever reason, he did like Axel wearing it. "Did Nami and Sora catch the bus?" he asked, snapping the old routine from his reverie. Axel nodded, absently chewing on his lip ring as they started toward his truck. Roxas was about to ask what was going on with him when Axel came to a stop and shot him a grin. "Do you feel that?" he asked as Roxas locked the front door. "Feel what?" The blonde frowned before he realized what Axel was talking about. "What, the heat?" They were standing outside in at least a foot of snow with no jackets on, and Roxas suddenly realized that he was nice and warm, as if he were sitting in front of a fire. "Is that you?" he asked, aghast. "Yeah, it is," Axel confessed. "My temperature runs a lot higher than normal people. It means my body needs to stay warmer than most because I can freeze to death at a higher temperature than everyone else. When I feel cold, my fire forms a wall of warmth around me to compensate for it. Or at least that's what the doctor says." Roxas grinned, stepping closer to his boyfriend to absorb more of the heat. "So you're like a walking space heater." As Axel nodded the confirmation, Roxas suddenly realized why he'd been so warm when he'd woken up that morning. "Also," Axel said, getting more excited that Roxas was obviously impressed, "remember when I told you that water makes me steam?" Roxas nodded. "Think that was something we'd never forget." "Well, it's only water that's colder than my skin, but it's still pretty annoying." Axel crouched down and placed his hand on top of the snow. Steam rose up from where his hand touched, and in seconds there was no snow where he placed his hand. Gaping, Roxas thought that he could really get used to something like that. He hated snow and cold, which sort of made Axel his new hero. "Let's get going, shall we?" They climbed into the truck and took a relatively quiet ride to school, chatting about unimportant things. The entire time, though, Roxas was fretting. What would happen when they got to school? Would they keep their relationship in the open and deal with the assholes together? Or would they just pretend nothing was happening between them and they were just friends? Roxas wasn't quite sure which way he wanted things to go. If they were open about it, Roxas could have a public claim to his boyfriend, and he rather liked the sound of that. On the other hand, he wasn't so sure he'd be able to deal with all the harassment that was sure to follow. If they were quiet about it, they'd have an easier time with the public, but Roxas didn't want to pretend that he and Axel were just friends. Roxas?" The blonde nearly jumped a mile as he was brought back to reality by Axel's voice. "Sorry, what?" he asked dazedly. Axel looked at him strangely before turning off the truck. "We're here, Roxy." "Oh." He slid out of the truck, shouldering his bag and joining Axel as he walked towards his group of friends. Halfway across the yard, Axel slipped his hand into Roxas's, holding it loosely, allowing Roxas the option to pull his own hand away. Roxas didn't. Instead, he tightened the grip just the slightest bit, taking a deep breath to be ready for any onslaught of nastiness. Much to his surprise, though, no one really seemed to notice, at least not yet. Axel's friends most certainly did notice, though, and they were met with a fair amount of catcalls as they approached. Roxas was a little bit surprised to see Section already there. His silver-haired friend was sitting on top of the benches, facing Dimix with his legs crossed in front of him. Dimix was chattering on cheerfully about something, and Section was listening with rapt attention, a book lying abandoned in his lap. Roxas smiled inwardly at the pair, knowing it would only be a matter of time before Section gave in to his feelings and allowed things to progress between the two. He liked the idea of his friends being happy. If there was any in the world who deserved to be happy, it was most definitely Section. They all talked about random stuff until the warning bell rang and their group suddenly scattered to head for their respective classes. As Axel ushered him away, Roxas could see Dimix holding Section back, talking to him for a moment. He full out grinned and allowed Axel to steer him away, all the while wondering if grilling Section for details would be too girly. Section watched the blonde in front of him, wanting to smile at the cute, flustered expression he wore. "So, Zexy, I was wondering if maybe you wanted to, hang out with me today. You can come to my place after school, but only if you want to. I mean, you don't have to, but I thought it might be fun." "Dimix," Section interrupted, finally taking pity on the babbling blonde. "Hanging out sounds fun. Where should we meet after school?" For a moment, Zexion thought Dimix was going to explode with happiness. "How about right here?" Dimix gushed. Zex barely had enough time to nod before Dimix swooped in and kissed him lightly on the cheek before prancing off to get to class. Zex could feel the blush spreading over his cheeks as he set forward towards homeroom. When he walked into first period 5 minutes late, he hardly even noticed the disapproving glance from his teacher. The only thing he could focus on for the rest of the day was Dimix.